Welcome to the Your Brilliant Difference podcast. It is Finka Yurkovic here, and I'm so delighted that you're spending some time with me here today, where we're going to help you show up in your brilliant and best self so you can bring the meaning, the impact, and the value you so want in your work, in your leadership, and in your business. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk all about imposter syndrome. Now, this is a specific request that had come in from one of our listeners to talk more about imposter syndrome, how to overcome it. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to share with you what imposter syndrome is. I'm also going to give you my point of view on imposter syndrome, and it's not all that bad. I know it's not comfortable, but it's not all that bad. I'll also talk about, how you can use imposter syndrome as a growth strategy, but I'm also going to give you 4 tactics that you can walk away with that you can practically implement to really put in place ways to overcome, manage through it, and really see yourself on the other side of imposter syndrome. Now, before we get started, if you haven't tuned in over the last couple episodes, we've been talking about this workplace engagement webinar. Now, you're tuning in onto this episode right now, so you've probably missed it, but you don't worry. You can tune in and you can get all the wonderful goodness that we were sharing on this workplace engagement webinar. In this workplace engagement webinar, I talked all about what is happening in the workplace today, how it's affecting engagement, but I'm also giving you 5 strategies on how to re-engage, reignite, strengthen your leadership, retain your talent, and really re-engage your teams and yourself in the impact and the value that you know you're here to bring in your work and in your leadership. So I want you to head on over to finkainc.com / I want to make sure I get this right, rise-webinar-replay. And there you can download the recording. You can watch it and get all that goodness that we were able to share with you, but also a re-engagement strategy. So you're going to have some practical ways in which you can re-engage yourself, your team, to really make your workplace more inspiring, results and high performance driven, and really to unlock the potential that's within yourself and with your team. So again, check out that webinar on workplace engagement. So here we go. Let's talk about what imposter syndrome is. And if you haven't heard of it, I'm sure you have. You've probably experienced it in some form. Now, the technical definition of imposter syndrome is this: it's a condition of feeling anxious and not experiencing success internally despite having high performing results and in your external world. It's a condition where we often feel like a fraud or a phony, that we're not maybe cut up for the title, the promotion, the project, the endeavor that you are embarking on. Now, often what happens when we experience imposter syndrome, the characteristics we feel are self-doubt. There's a sense that we are undervaluing our contributions or what we can bring to the table. It can also come on the impetus of exhaustion or burnout. So if you've been burning yourself out or working really hard or not taking care of yourself by getting the sleep, the exercise, the meditation practice, maybe spending time outside of work, it can lead to this sense of wearing ourselves out that can actually also trigger imposter syndrome. Often what can also happen is that we set unrealistic expectations. And when we've got these unrealistic expectations on, how we need to get 100% or, perform without error or any mishap or failure, those unrealistic expectations can also have us feel that sense of imposter syndrome. Another way that it can show up is I know for myself that I've got a desire to do my best work, as I'm sure you do as well. Often what can also happen is our quest for excellence can have us really show up. And if it's not perfect, if it's not just right, it doesn't feel right. And we are embodied in the sense of fraud, phoniness, and imposter syndrome. So, just kind of take note of what might be some of the triggers that, catalyze this sense of feeling that you're not measuring up, that you're not what they all believe you're cracked up to be, and who are you to be in this room or to lead this project, lead this team? And do you have this sense of self-doubt? Are you kind of running on fumes? And are you, setting these unreal expectations on yourself and on others? Now, when I think about imposter syndrome, I don't actually think it's all that bad. I think it's a good thing. I think it actually is triggering or activating this part inside of us that's telling us you're going and doing something that you may not have done before, or you're exposing yourself to situations and circumstances that are taking you outside of your comfort zone. And I like to call that your edge move. And so I want you to think about moments where you have felt imposter syndrome, like, who are you to do this? How are you going to measure up? Are you going to meet these expectations? And was that something that was outside your comfort zone? So was it something that you were doing an edge move? Did you get a promotion? Did you say yes to a project that as you're in it, you're like, why did I say yes to this? And I'm a little over my head on it. So those are things that can be contributing to feeling and experiencing the sense of imposter syndrome. One of the other things that I look at when it comes to imposter syndrome that can happen and what it does, it's a way for us to sabotage our brilliant difference. So you have these beautiful gifts, these talents, these skills, these God-given ways that you've been gifted to show up in the world, in your personal relationships, in your work, and in your leadership. And often it can actually feel really big. It can feel like, I can't shine that brightly. I can't demonstrate my leadership that boldly. And it can be very scary, especially again, when we're doing those things called edge moves. What can happen is we inadvertently self-sabotage ourselves to not live up to those expectations because we put on exceedingly high expectations. Our quest for excellence has us determined for perfectionists, and so we don't let our work go. And what happens? You don't shine. You don't bring your brilliant, beautiful self. You don't leave the impact, and you don't get the reward and the recognition of that. And inadvertently, we've self-sabotaged ourselves because of this idea of imposter syndrome, of feeling a fake, a phony in some way. Another way in which I see imposter syndrome get in the way of our beautiful, brilliant self is it's almost like it's a mechanism for our brain to keep us safe. Now, often when you're experiencing imposter syndrome, you're getting outside your comfort zone. You're doing something that you've never done before. You might be in a high stakes presentation, maybe presenting to a big client or executives, and you want to impress and you want to leave a good and valuable impact on them. And there's a lot of uncertainty. There's, you're nervous, you're stressed. And this imposter syndrome comes in to shield us, to protect us from moving outside of our comfort zone. It's our brain's way of keeping us safe in what we know, what is familiar. So I want you to notice when you notice imposter syndrome coming on, is it because you're doing this edge move? Is it a way that you're circumventing this edge move and preventing yourself from shining so beautifully and brightly in your brilliant difference, and it is a way to self-sabotage? Or are you noticing that it's a way in which your brain is looking to keep you safe because it is scary? You're getting outside your comfort zone. And this is just your brain's way of saying, hey, let's not do this. It's actually, even though you might get a better outcome by, pitching that presentation, presenting to those executives, saying yes to that promotion or project, even though you might have better outcomes, our brain prefers certainty and comfort. So it's going to do everything it can to pull us back to, what's safe, what's certain, and what's comfortable. All right. So just notice those things. Notice those things about what triggers or activates the sense of imposter syndrome for you. So I've experienced my fair share of imposter syndrome. I am going to also say that if you're not experiencing imposter syndrome, you're most likely not getting outside your comfort zone. You're not doing things that scare you. And when I'm not in that state of uncertainty, and it's not that we want it all the time, but there are going to be particular moments that you want to invite this sense of uncertainty, this sense of, excitement, because you don't know what's going to happen. I remember when I moved from a sales role, an individual contributor, into a sales leader. There was a sense like, who am I to do this? Great. I was great at sales, managing relationships and portfolios, but who am I now to lead a team? And jumping 2 feet in that, and feeling the sense of self-doubt, and can I do this? But really leaning into the faith that people had put me in that job because they believed that I could do that. So it's like, okay, if they're going to invest and think that I can do this job, there was something about me that I know I can follow through on. And maybe this imposter syndrome is just something that's there to protect me. There was a moment where it's not one moment, it's a long moment. I remember when I was writing my book, Self from Love. For the longest time, I could not even tell anybody that I was writing a book. Who am I to be a writer? Who am I to author a book? And it wasn't until I actually published the book and months later that it felt like, okay, I'm a writer. I'm a writer. I'm a writer. I can say that. And so the sense of imposter syndrome overtakes us because it's becoming something we're going to become. It's not who we are right now or something we have been. And so when I think about your brilliant difference, this is what I love about this work around your brilliant difference. It is, we are bringing who we were, our experience, our skills, our expertise, our talents, the craft, the projects that we've delivered on. We're bringing all of that with us. But your brilliant difference is more about who you are today and who you're going to become tomorrow. And so you're not yet that thing. You're not yet the author. You're not yet the leader. You're not yet the business owner. You're not yet the speaker. You're not yet that. And as a result, you're going to feel like a fake or a fraud. You're going to feel like, well, who am I to be that when you're not yet there? Um, and so we've got to be patient with ourselves. We almost have to wait. It's like we've got to catch up to this future sense of self that we see ourselves becoming, that we're not yet there. And that's what's this trigger for this sense of imposter syndrome, that there's this idea of who you see yourself becoming. And that version of you has yet to become a reality, has yet to be embedded in you in this sense of self and the sense of identity. And as a result, you're feeling like an imposter. But it doesn't mean you can't do it. I want you to look back on your past, look back on your accomplishments, your achievements. I'm going to venture to say that most of them were achieved, were things that you thought you would never be able to do, or you got outside your comfort zone, or you went where you didn't go before. And then you achieved this thing, whether it was a big win on a project, maybe you closed a big deal on a client, you nailed that presentation in front of those executives, or you successfully started your business and you're 2 years in and you're just like, nailing it. All of those things were things that you didn't feel that you could do at one point. And when you accomplished it, looking back on it, you're like, oh, I nailed it. I did it. And so that's what I love about this work, about your brilliant difference. It's not only about who you are, and who you have been. It's about who you're going to become. And you're naturally going to activate potentially this idea of this imposter syndrome because you've not yet gone there. One of the other things I want you to think about when it comes to imposter syndrome, and when it is alive and well, or when it is starting to, percolate and awaken inside of you, I want you to think about how it really is there to activate your potential. I think about mutual funds. When I was a financial advisor back in the day, and even today as an investor in investments and things like mutual funds, often we would say, we would demonstrate past performance, rates of return on 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, and 1 year, and even the 6 and 3 month past performance. But we would always say that past performance is not a determinant of future. Now, they didn't hold my clients back from investing in those funds. That didn't hold me back from investing in certain investments today. But there's this confidence we have in the institution that is doing the investing for us, the fund managers that are investing and making those selections in the stock choices or the bond choices that they're making. And that confidence in that potential of earning is what we are investing in. I want you to think about your growth, your potential. this sense of imposter syndrome comes in play because we're more invested in past performance and thinking we got to repeat that. You don't. I actually want you to let go of past performance because it's going to taint or limit what your potential and your future performance can be. And instead, lean in on those things around your capability, your competencies, your past achievements, the people that are around you that are here to support you. You're not here to do it all alone. And as a result, you're investing in your potential and not your performance. One other point of view I want to offer you when you think about imposter syndrome is this sense that our happiness and fulfillment when it comes to an experience or an event comes as the result of the anticipation even more than the actual experience. So, for instance, let's say you're applying for a leadership position in your organization. You are going to be experience more happiness and fulfillment by experiencing the anticipation of getting that job. So the interview process, the application process, maybe the project or the first 90-day plan you had to submit for it, the grueling, panel interviews, maybe you had to go through 4 of them. The anticipation of getting that position is actually what's going to give you the happiness and the fulfillment, even more so than actually getting the job. So now I'm going to put this in the frame of the imposter syndrome. I want you to think about this imposter syndrome as a sense of this anticipation, this maybe it's going to work, maybe it's going to not work, maybe you're going to excel and you're going to do well, that this moment of uncertainty, this anticipation is actually what's going to make the achievement of the project, the presentation, the client, the deal, the impact that you make is actually going to make it even more rewarding because you're experiencing this sense of uncertainty that's triggering imposter syndrome. And it's actually activating this happiness of, juice called anticipation. And so I want you to think about it in that perspective as well. All right. So those are a couple of ways I want you to, as a point of view, to broaden your perspective when you think about imposter syndrome. That yes, it has this anxiety, this feeling of self-doubt, these expectations we place on ourselves and how we want things to turn out. However, the uncertainty of it can actually catalyze the happiness and the fulfillment of that event, that it's a sign that you're getting outside your comfort zone, that you're stretching yourself and you're living into your potential, not who you once were, but who you are here to become more of. And that's that opportunity that you have. So I want to give you 4 tactics, 4 ways that when you are experiencing imposter syndrome or this sense of self-doubt or this moment of, uncertainty and not sure, is it going to work or not work out, what you can do about it. So I'm going to make it easy for you. I'm going to give you 4 R's. So the first is release. The second is rationalize. The third is reframe. And the fourth is rehearse. So let's talk about release. So there's a book, I believe Susan Jeffers wrote it. It's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And that's what I want you to do. You can, I know I do, when I feel anxiety or pain or fear. My go-tos are candy, chocolate, the pantry. So it's like, I want to make the feeling of that fear go away. It's like, let me just satisfy it with some sugar. And I do my darndest to try to work through that. What I find works better than that and limits the calories or the bad calories that I put in my body is when I take that feeling and I actually feel it, as opposed to, cover it up with some sugar or make it go away by, some people have, scrolling on Instagram by not feeling it and numbing ourselves out. I want you to actually feel the feeling of phoniness, of fraud, of fear, anxiety, the self-doubt. Actually process it. So feel the fear. Some ways that you can feel it is just to sit for a moment and notice where it is in your body. Is it, is it in your chest? Is it on your shoulders? It is in your head. And what I love doing is like giving it a color, and kind of tapping into my senses. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? And that gives me an opportunity to quickly go through and experience that feeling. The other thing you might do is just journal about it, write about how you're feeling and how it sucks and it's horrendous. And why are you feeling this way? And, like you've done this so many times and why now? And really, and just have that conversation with yourself. Again, it can take 10 minutes for you to just feel the fear. Feel the fear so you can release it versus bury it, numb it, hide it, not face it. It's very difficult to do. So I'm going to say this is not easy work to do. We're going to do everything to procrastinate, even though I know all the things that I have to do to feel a feeling and to process the feeling. It's the last thing on my list that I want to do. I'd rather go in and have a piece of chocolate instead. It tastes better, but I know it doesn't make it go away. So I encourage you to release it, release the anxiety, the fear, the emotion that is triggering the imposter syndrome. So number 2 is rationalize. Now, what do I mean by rationalize? So the first thing we did was actually feel it emotionally. So let's actually do the emotional, the heart work. Now we're going to go and do the intellectual work. Let's do the rationalize. Like, is this a rational experience? Is this what is the story you're telling yourself about this event, about this moment that you're experiencing imposter syndrome? And in this moment, you might be telling yourself, I can't do this. Who am I to do this? But then you start looking and say, well, I've done things that were difficult in the past. I've failed and I've picked myself up again. The world didn't end because you made a mistake or you didn't nail the project or the presentation, that you can overcome it. And then rationalize the fact that you've been very successful in other areas of your leadership, of your impact in your work. And in some ways that you were also in very similar situations and got positive outcomes. So rationalize them. One of the tools that I also like to lean in on is it's called The Work by Byron Katie. And she has these 4 questions that she has a beautiful body of work. There's a book called The Work about it. And the 4 questions are, and especially when you're experiencing imposter syndrome, they come in really handy. Question number 1, is it true? Is this true? Is the story you're telling yourself about the situation, is it true? Yes or no? The second question you're going to ask yourself is, can you absolutely know that it's true? So is it absolutely true? So is it true that you aren't cut out for this? Who are you to, present this, write this, build this, deliver on this? And is this absolutely true? And so again, that's another question. Well, you might be like, well, it's not absolutely true. There's a truth to it, but it might not be absolutely true. The third question you're going to ask yourself is, how do you react and what happens when you believe that thought? So when I believe that I'm a phony or a fraud and I'm not cut out to do this, well, how do I feel about that? Well, I feel like crap. I feel unmotivated. I feel like I want to retract. I don't want to invest in the project or the people. I notice I introvert myself a lot more. I notice the thoughts that I'm thinking. My head is really frenetic. I'm hurried. I got to do things. I have to energy. Or I should energy starts to show up. Oh, okay. So you start noticing that. And then who would you be? So question number 4, who would you be without this thought? So who would I be without this thought? Well, I'd be freer. I'd feel so much better. I'd be more productive. I'd be more invested in the relationships and the work that I'm doing. I might be moving the needle and putting my slides together on that presentation or writing that business case or case study that I'm working on. I'd be inviting my teammates to collaborate more. And then finally, the last one is called the turnaround. And this question is where we're really focusing on turning the situation around. So what's the opposite of the imposter syndrome? So instead of imposter syndrome, what if you thought that you're someone that can actually do this, that you're someone who, can lean on past experiences to really fuel yourself, that, maybe, they've given you the job because they see that you are able and equipped to do it. And so that's another way of thinking about it. So again, that's another beautiful way to help work through and rationalize ways in which you can work through this sense of imposter syndrome. Now, the third one I want to give you is called reframe. So this is one of my favorites. The way my brain is wired, it does a lot of reframing for me. So it's a natural gift that I get to bring. It's part of my brilliant difference. And this is just really looking at it and saying, reframing the situation. And I love using the term of course. So I of course myself. Of course I'm experiencing imposter syndrome. I've never done this before. I've never written a book. I've never led a project of this magnitude. I've never had this opportunity to present to these executives and to these leaders. And so we have this opportunity to, of course, ourselves, and to really give ourselves this opportunity to understand that we are getting outside of our comfort zone, and that imposter syndrome doesn't mean that we're a fraud or a phony. That actually means you're just making an edge move. So reframe imposter syndrome that it is an edge move that you are making. And finally, I want to offer you this one called Rehearse. So, Rehearse, it's all about really stepping into moments in your career and in your leadership where you nailed it, where you got it, where things really came together. I had this moment where it was many years ago. However, it's this one moment where I was making a presentation. I had about 30 senior executives of the organization in this room, in this U-shaped table, and I was in front of them, and I was presenting my findings on a program that I was leading around coaching and the impact it was having on the leaders and the teams and the customer loyalty metrics that I was presenting on. And I remember it was just I was nervous. I was anxious. I felt in that I had a bit of that imposter syndrome, like, who am I here to present to these leaders in these rooms, and hopefully, and will I have something of value to share with them and to offer them? And at the end of that presentation, it was like one of the best presentations I'd ever made. I felt good in my skin. I felt authentic. I felt integral, and I nailed it. That moment and that experience is something that I lean into when I have this moment of imposter syndrome for, current or future events. I step into the feeling of what it felt like when I nailed it, that I had, that there are seeds of something very similar that's going on in your current situation that you might be experiencing imposter syndrome. And then I want you to lean into a past top at best performance and really feel what it was like in that moment and start and transferring that emotional experience, that sense of identity and who you were after you had that positive experience and literally transfer it over to where you are today. One of the practices that I like is called power primers. And I start with these statement starters. One is I am willing, I believe, I am, and I am. And and so what I want you to do is to think, I am willing to get outside of my comfort zone and make this big presentation. I am willing to say yes to this position to really demonstrate my leadership and impact. I am willing to, write about this topic and create a white paper or a case study and present it to our senior leaders or on LinkedIn or on a blog. So I am willing. The second is, I believe I can. There's a sense that we start priming ourselves to believe that we can do this. And so this is how we're rehearsing. So I am willing, I believe, I choose to, that you're making a conscious choice to do this edge move. I choose to demonstrate my leadership and my impact by showing up with the best and most valuable information I can at this leadership meeting or at this client meeting. And then finally, I am. The I am energy is you're really bringing your sense of self to this moment. Now, you might not be feeling it because you're still feeling that anxiety and that stress and that phoniness a little bit because of the imposter syndrome. But what I want you to do is tap into the feeling that you had on that past best performance and transfer it to what it would be like if you felt that today with this experience that you're going through today. All right. So there you have it. Release. So release the negative emotion by processing it, rationalize, get in your head and intellectualize. This is a logical experience that you're having. Is it rational? And then I want you to reframe it. Reframe it. You're doing an edge move. And finally, I want you to rehearse, practice the sense of self, the successful, confident, very resourceful person you already are, and tap into past successes and carry that forward in this moment when you're experiencing this sense of anxiety, self-doubt, or imposter syndrome. So I want to leave you with this one quote. I so love this quote. Let me just grab it here so I can read it to you word for word. It's written by Stephen Pressfield. He has a number of books. This one comes specifically out of his The War of Art. And it continues to remind me of how imposter syndrome, how you can use it as a strength, self-doubt, that it is not your Achilles heel, that it's actually a sense of your integrity and your confidence. So here it is. Self-doubt can be an ally. This is because it serves as an indicator of aspiration. It reflects love. Love is something we dream of doing and desire to do it. If you find yourself asking yourself or your friends, am I really a writer? Am I really an artist? Chances you are. The counterfeit innovator is wildly self-confident. The real one is scared to death. So on that note, I want you to think about this way of imposter syndrome, that it is the catalyst to awakening you to your most confident, brilliant, and best self. We will see you next week at our next episode. Bye for now.